introduce our next session.
Get this thing
As
started.
much fun as it is for us to be able to sit and talk and share, we want to have the opportunity to learn from Rabbi Debra Newman Kamin, who is rabbi at Congregation Am Yisrael. She came there in 1990. 94 became the congregation's senior and sole rabbi, being the first congregation in the Chicago metropolitan area to be led by a woman. And for many years, it was the largest conservative congregation in the country to have that distinction. She has been an incredible leader for the Rabbinical Assembly, as well as serving as our immediate past president, one of those wonderful, wonderful titles. And now we will have the opportunity to learn from her.
Good morning to everybody. This is I'm incredibly proud of this whole Tikkun. I'm glad I can see Alana's face, the work that went into this to bring this worldwide, international, with people, so many wonderful teachers, and I'm so proud to be amongst my colleagues as one of them. So my rabbinic mentor was Rabbi William Frankel. He was the founding rabbi of my congregation. I was his assistant rabbi for several years before I became the sole rabbi of the congregation. And he used to like to pose this question to the congregants, that as a Jew, if you were stranded on a desert island and you could only take one Jewish book with you, what would you bring? So, people would say, well, I would bring the Torah, I bring a Chumash. People would say I would bring a Siddur. I will tell you there's no right answer, right? But he would say, no, you have to bring the calendar. There's no way that you can be a practicing Jew. You could ostensibly pray without a Siddur. It'd be hard to study Torah, but you can't be a practicing Jew if you don't know what day it is. And so the title of this talk, it comes from a teaching that he liked to teach about this, was a quote from Samson Raphael Hirsch, Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch, that said, our calendar is our catechism. So first of all, what is a catechism? It's not a word that we as Jews often use. So just to, to kind of be on the same page here, a catechism is a summary of religious doctrine. So it's a summary of, let's say, your ideology. And so the suggestion is that if we look at our calendar as a narrative, then it tells a certain story that actually tells the theology, or would even say the story of the Jewish people, that's repeated over and over and over. So if I could have the first slide, and I'm going to first have to prove to you where would we start? If we look at the calendar as telling our story, then where would we actually start? So in Exodus 12:22, just to give you some context, we're in the middle, we're at the beginning, I would say, of the Exodus from Egypt, right? We're 12 chapters into the book of Shemot, and we are learning the story of the children of Israel, of Moses leading the children of Israel, of standing up to Pharaoh and telling him, let my people go, and that we're on the cusp of leaving Egypt. And then, just as everybody's kind of getting ready to go, God gives Moses certain instruction. And he says, this month, Nisan, shall be to you the beginning of months. It's the first for you of the months of the year. Now, if I could ask you, when I teach, I like to ask questions and have people participate and answer. I'm not used to answering my own questions. At least the only benefit of answering my own questions is I get the answer that I want, and nobody can stump me by saying something that I wasn't prepared for. So I'll answer the question. Well, wait, what do you mean that Nisan is the beginning of all of the months? Nisan is not the beginning of the year. If I asked you when's the beginning of the new year, you would say to me, well, that's Rosh Hashanah, right? Like, the year turns over. We say Happy New Year. Remember, Rabbi? We say Happy New Year. It's the new year. So what does this mean that Nisan is the beginning of the year? So, but in the Torah, it tells us, and we know that Tishrei is actually not the first month of the year. So Nisan is the first month of the year. So that's rather confusing. But luckily, the Mishnah for Rosh Hashanah comes and clears this up for us. And it says, there are 4 New Years. There are 4 New Years. There's not just one New Year. There are 4 actually in our calendar. So one of the New Years is the 1st of Nisan, the New Year for the kings and for the festivals. On the 1st of Elul, the New Year for the tithing of animals. On the 1st of Tishrei, the New Year for the years, for the sabbatical years, for the Jubilee years, and for the planting of the vegetables. And on the 1st of Shvat, the New Year for the trees. So we actually have 4 New Years built into the Jewish calendar. So this is actually not as hard to understand as we would think, because actually in our modern life, we also have different New Years, right? We have New Year's Eve, January 1st, Happy New Year, it's the new year. But we also have, for those of us from a fiscal year. For our congregation, the fiscal year begins July 1. Many institutions that have educational years want to start their year then, because then they get an entire school year in one fiscal calendar. It wouldn't make any sense to divide that up into different calendars. So we have the fiscal calendar for when we look at for all of our budgeting purposes. And then for those of us that, the school year also feels like a new year, a new beginning if we have children. And my children are all grown up, but the beginning of the school year with, new school clothes and school supplies. So we in our lives understand that there can be different New Years. So I hope you buy this, because the whole idea of our calendar is the catechism must start with Nisan, or it doesn't actually make any sense. So we're going to start with Pesach, right? If we're looking at the calendar as our doctrine, then we start with Pesach. So if I can have the next slide. So first of all, you may ask, Rabbi, what is that thing at the beginning of the slide? So I apologize that I'm not my son had to help me with the PowerPoint. I will give full confession here that that's not my strength. So the top of the page is actually a slinky. Some of us that are of a certain age, I don't know if kids still play with slinkies, but those of us at a certain age, played with slinkies. That's what went for entertainment in the 60s. What can I tell you? So why a slinky? So I would like to suggest my theory. I call the theory of Jewish history. I like to call it the slinky concept of Jewish history. Why a slinky? So when we look at our calendar, we say, well, it's cyclical, right? The calendar is a circle. It's the circle of life. We start in one place, and each year we come back to the same place over and over and over again. But I would like to suggest that that's actually only part of the story of our calendar, because we also believe in our tradition that our calendar, that we're moving somewhere, that we're linear in that we as Jews believe that we are moving, that history is moving, that it's moving us to the ultimate messianic era. Hard to feel that. We're, that on really good days, when we see things in the world improving, we say, see, the arc of justice. And we hope that we're moving somewhere. In a lot of dark times, it's sometimes hard to believe that. But Judaism at its core believes that we are moving, we are improving, we're moving to something better. We're moving to the ultimate goal of being in the messianic era. So I call it the slinky theory of Judaism, because if you pull out a slinky, as the picture so beautifully shows, you are both doing a cycle, right? So you're repeating the cycle of the calendar, but slowly it's also moving in a linear progression. So you're not stuck in the same circle going over and over. You are moving towards something. And frankly, if you don't believe it for the ultimate history of the world, you should certainly know it from your own lives, how different we are, and Pesach, where we're going to begin there. For me, there's probably no bigger holiday in my life that really illustrates this slinky nature, because all of us, if we grew up Jewish, all of us grew up being at our parents' or older family members' Seder. And we all have memories of our childhood, of our, my brother and I used to like to go under the table and tie the shoes of our family members together. We were delightfully not well-behaved children at the Seder, but in those days, Seders were not really geared towards young children. So sitting quietly was hard. So we went from a place in this slinky narrative where we were children at somebody else's Seder to becoming teenagers and all that entailed at a Seder, to becoming young adults, to becoming a married couple, to becoming the parents of our own children, to facing the death of our parents and then becoming Seder leaders, not Seder participants, to having grown children out of the house. So every year we come back to Seder, but we are so different. And we hold on to the parts of our memories of what it was like. I remember my grandfather at Seder, to what it means to be, the patriarch and the matriarch of a Seder. So why do we start with Pesach? Freedom from slavery, right? That's the story. If you had to really, I know we have the story of what would you say about Judaism standing on one foot, but one could really make the argument that if you really want to say something about Judaism standing on one foot, what you would say is we were slaves in Egypt and God freed us. That is really, in many ways, that's the whole story. Right? Everything that we are, everything that we think about, the appreciation that we could have been slaves, but instead we were free. The moral responsibility that holds us to, and how we treat other human beings and suffering in the world. The gratitude and loyalty that we have for a God that took us out of Egypt and freed us. And this is the foundational principle. At Pesach time, particularly, I'm so aware when I'm davening, when I'm reading the liturgy in the Siddur, how many times we mention Yitziat Mitzrayim. So it's a pretty high point, but it's not the highest point, right? It's not the highest point. The highest point, and that's my little graph, is the holiday of Shavuot, the holiday that we are celebrating today. Because of course, why were we brought forth from Egypt? We were brought forth to be in this covenantal relationship with God. And that covenantal relationship with God is marked by receiving the gift of Torah. This is the precious gift that God has given the Jewish people, and really through us to much of the world. And so that is the peak, right? You can't really get better than receiving Torah. However, we don't do so very well. And immediately in our, well, not immediately calendar, it happens over the course of weeks, months. But where do you go? Where would one think that we would go from the highest point if you weren't looking at the graph and you didn't know what holiday or commemoration was coming next? You would hope that, then we enter the land of Israel and we all live happily ever after, and that's the end of the story. But we know that that's not the end of the Jewish story. And so immediately after Shavuot, the very next thing we commemorate in the Jewish calendar is Tisha Bav, the lowest point of the entire year. And it is the lowest point of the entire year, we're told from our tradition. Well, first of all, what does Tisha Bav commemorate? Tisha B'Av commemorates both the destruction of the first temple and the second temple. And if you read the book of many of the prophets and the book of Lamentations, we're told that we get to Tisha B'Av, we get to the lowest point of our calendar, particularly because we couldn't follow Torah. We couldn't fulfill that which was given to us, that which was expected to us. We sinned and we were punished, of course, by Jewish theology by the time of the destruction of the Second Temple. That theology has morphed a little bit more into not just how we treated God, but even more, and First Temple also, how we treat other people. Because we didn't care for, we didn't take care of those that we were responsible for, because we abused other human beings, because we broke the covenant with God through idol worship, we fall to our lowest point. Now, Tisha B'Av, I always wonder when I teach our calendar as our catechism, what it's like, and I've never really asked this for our colleagues in, let's say, in South America. Our colleagues in South America are celebrating Tisha B'Av during the school year. Those of us, if our kids go to Jewish camp, they know a lot about Tisha B'Av. They build a temple, they light it on fire, they burn it to the ground. But for those of us who have a lot of students and adults who never attended Jewish summer camp, summer could easily pass. They're on vacation. They're not paying attention to Tisha B'Av. And I think that you miss a really important sort of theological point of the calendar, when you are not aware, when you're not aware of the calendar. So we have 3 weeks leading to Tisha B'Av that warn, we read special haftarot that warn of what is going to happen if we don't follow the rules, if we don't listen to God, if we don't change our ways. And of course, the Israelites do not, and bring this terrible tragedy. It's not just the destruction of the temple, it's war, it's destruction. It's sort of the foundational bedrock for, this is our fault. This is what our behavior led to. And so Tisha B'Av is a period of mourning. It's a period of self-reflection, and it's a time to think about what our behavior is. We think of Rosh Hashanah as a time of thinking about our behavior, but it actually starts with Tisha B'Av. Now, I'd like to mention there are 2 magic 7s built into our calendar, right? The first magic 7 is the 7 between Pesach and Shavuot. Now, 7 is a very important number in Judaism. It signifies God's creation. It signifies our partnership as being co-creators of this world with God. And if 7 is good, the only thing that's better than 7 is 7 times 7. And we at Shavuot right now are marking this special 7 times 7 between Pesach and Shavuot. But we have another special 7 built into our calendar, and that is the 7 between Tisha B'Av and Rosh Hashanah, where once again, we don't count in the same way. We don't have a counting of the Omer, but we mark 7 weeks, which is pretty remarkable that the calendar actually has this 7-week period. And I often say to my own congregation that if you miss the 7 weeks between Tisha B'Av and Rosh Hashanah, then you are not really fully prepared for Rosh Hashanah. And I think for most American Jews, they come into Rosh Hashanah cold, right? They haven't had the spiritual preparation. They come in cold. And then they look and they're tasked with doing tshuva, right? They're tasked with beginning this process of repentance in really, if you're looking at our calendar, in a very shortened time frame. But if you actually begin with Tisha B'Av, you actually have 7 weeks to go through the calendar to do the spiritual preparation, to think about what does it mean to do real tshuva? What does it mean to have sinned, to have failed, to have missed the mark, all of the various ways that we refer to tshuva, but to really give it deep thought. And so one of my favorite things to teach during this 7-week period are the special haftarot. So each Shabbat for 7 weeks, we have a special haftarah that talks about, each one talks about the real possibility that even though we sinned, that even though we failed, that each human being has the possibility of doing better, of improving and repairing their relationship with God. So the idea is that, which really, without tshuva, we would like life would be sort of hopeless, right? If there was no sense that you could ever, forgive people, expect forgiveness, do better, repair relationships with other people, repair relationships with God. It's actually the most hopeful thing that we have, that our prophets bring to the world, is this idea that we are actually not fatally flawed in that way. So each haftarah moves us through the process of comforting us and promising us that we can do better and leading us to this next place. And so after the 7-week period, of course, we get to Rosh Hashanah, where we still say Happy New Year, even though we started with Nisan. We have the possibility, and that's what our high holiday period tells us, that we have the possibility to heal, to repair, to ask forgiveness, and to actually become different people. Now, I do hear a lot from congregants. It kind of depends on sort of your philosophy of life. And I do hear people say to me, it's not unusual for people to say to me, you know what, Rabbi, people don't really change. Whoever you are is who you've always been, and people really don't change. And so I'd like to say, on some level, I understand why people say that, because first of all, change is extremely hard. It's not an easy process. It is extremely difficult to change behaviors, and it takes a lot of will, and it takes a lot of discipline. My husband used to have something hanging in our workout room, which was an article, but the title of the article was "Change in a Nanosecond or Never." And the point of the article was, like, every moment we have this ability to choose to change. And if we don't choose it, we're never going to change. So in keeping with my slinky theory of Judaism, if you've ever pulled out a slinky, it doesn't move that much. Every year we may have the ability to move just a teeny little bit, right? We're not going to move that much. We're not going to become whatever I say to my kids when my kids were little, every year before Rosh Hashanah, I would say to them, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for all the ways that I was not the mother that I wanted to be this year. I'm sorry when I lost my patience, when I should have been patient. I'm sorry when I raised my voice and I yelled at you, when I wish that I had spoken to you in a calm manner, and I'm sorry. And my kids would say to me, yeah, Mom, you said that last year. Luckily, which was true, right? Which was absolutely true. I never really, when they were children, fulfilled that hope that I might have had for whatever that ideal mother might have looked like. But I tried, every year to just improve a little bit. But like a slinky, if every year you just improve a little bit, then hopefully over the course of a certain amount of years, you actually aren't exactly the same as you were, which is why you hear people say things so very often like, one of the benefits of being older, there are many things that are not beneficial about being older, especially physical things. But one of the things that I've learned as older, I have more wisdom, I have more patience, I have more tolerance. Like, that doesn't just happen, by accident. It happens because, well, part of it is maybe you do calm down a little bit, but part of it is you do gain all of these things, which in American society are not always appreciated as much as we hope that they would be. American society certainly struggles with embracing the idea of aging. But with aging, even though I personally go into it kicking and screaming, but with aging and all of the work that we do to improve, actually, most of us do see some of the fruits of that in our lifetime. So we have now moved up, right? We've now moved up. I would put Rosh Hashanah, maybe a little bit below Pesach, certainly a little bit below Shavuot. But then what happens with Sukkot, and why did I include Sukkot? I was talking about this with my son, and he's like, where's Hanukkah and Purim? So I'm like, you know what, we're going to leave those out because they don't fit this narrative. I could probably figure a way to fit them in. But I don't think they're really so important to this narrative, and they're not, certainly on par with Pesach, Shavuot, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot. But why did I include Sukkot? Because we're told that when the Messianic era comes, the only holiday that we will still celebrate in this idyllic world, whatever it looks like, the only holiday we will still celebrate is the holiday of Sukkot. So Sukkot becomes representative of Messianic times. It is, and why Sukkot? Of all the holidays, why Sukkot? Sukkot is referred to as Zman Simchatinu, right? The holiday where we celebrate and express full joy, full celebration. The idea that we will still need to celebrate joy, that will be so important that we will not lose that, even when we no longer need this framework because we're in the Messianic era. So this is really the narrative of the Jewish people. We celebrate freedom. We celebrate the receiving of Torah, but we're human beings and we fail and we sin and we don't live up to our potential and we hurt other people and we forget to mind our relationship with God. And then we have, and sometimes we have really dark days. The celebration of Shavuot juxtaposed of the darkness in Israel right now, and the thought of our brothers and sisters in Israel celebrating Shavuot in bomb shelters, and our concern as Jews for the suffering of all people, including innocent Palestinian civilians. We know that even in the midst of joy, the world is a very broken place. But our calendar, our theology, our catechism promises us that we as human beings have the ability to raise ourselves and others out of darkness, to work towards the ultimate redemption. And as it says in the old popular Israeli folk song, like, if not today, then maybe tomorrow. And if not tomorrow, maybe the day after tomorrow. Or as we say traditionally, next year in Jerusalem, right? Maybe not this year. Maybe not even, we have tickets for this summer. I am hoping that we will go. But if not this year, then next year, because we believe that however bad things get, that there's always the possibility for redemption. There's always the possibility of starting over. And we do it in our calendar every single year. So it was wonderful being able to do this little teaching with you this morning, and Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach. Thank you so much for your words of wisdom, for sharing them. I'm sure that you are a much better mother than your children.
They tell me this now that they're grown. So
okay, good. And now that they realize all the things that you were doing for them that they took for granted.
Right.
But thank you for that walk through the calendar. I've done walks through the Siddur that talk about sort of those peak moments, but I haven't seen the calendar laid out in that way, and I think it's very helpful for us to be able to think about what the year is and how we move our way through it, and hopefully each year getting a little bit higher up on that scale.
I want to say a quick hello to my friend Tom. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to get off to prepare for my own Am Yisrael services, where we've had you join us so many times. So I hope all is well with you. And I'm going to say Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach, Rabbi.
Chag Sameach.